Voralik was a titan among mortals, a name spoken with reverence and dread across the galaxy. Towering and imposing, his every step echoed the authority of a being born to command. The Corvani Empire, forged in fire and blood under his iron grip, spanned countless star systems, their banners waving proudly in the void of space. Stories of his exploits painted him as invincible, a warrior king who had never known defeat, a conqueror who had subdued empires, and a ruler who wielded fear as deftly as his legendary blade. To his people, he was a god. To his enemies, he was a nightmare. Vorthalik's triumphs had reshaped the galaxy itself. Battles that should have been impossible were routine for him. His fleet's arrival meant inevitable subjugation. The Corvani were unmatched in their technology, their warriors relentless and efficient. Under his reign, the Corvani Empire reached its zenith, becoming a superpower no race dared challenge. But power begets envy, and envy festers in the shadows. The betrayal began subtly, as all great betrayals do. Allies grew distant. Treaties were quietly broken. Unexplained disruptions spread through Corvani supply lines. Vorthalik suspected treachery but underestimated the scale of the conspiracy against him. His downfall came in a single, cataclysmic battle. The combined fleets of the allied races, once his staunch supporters, descended upon the Corvani forces in an ambush. The Corvani ships, formidable as they were, stood no chance against the sheer numbers and coordinated assault of the united armada. The battle was a cacophony of destruction. Energy weapons tore through the void, rending Corvani's ships into lifeless debris. Vorthalik, aboard his flagship, fought valiantly, leading his troops with unwavering resolve. He was more than a leader, he was a symbol of defiance. But even symbols have their limits. As wave after wave of enemy forces battered his fleet, his remaining allies turned their weapons against him, sealing his fate. The invincible warrior king was finally captured, not through skill or bravery, but through deceit. The allied races debated what to do with him. Execution would have been too swift, too merciful. Instead, they chose humiliation and slow death. Vorthalik was exiled to Iridios V, a desolate planet that was more punishment than prison. It was a place where life was an anomaly. The air was thick with toxins, each breath a struggle. The landscape was jagged and hostile, filled with predators whose very existence seemed like a cruel joke of evolution. The storms that raged across the planet were charged with electromagnetic pulses, ensuring no advanced technology could function for long. Here, even survival was a form of suffering. As Vorthalik was cast down onto the planet, his captors jeered. They mocked his once mighty stature, reveling in his downfall. "Let him rot," one alien commander sneered. "The galaxy will forget him, just as it will forget his empire." And so, they left him, a broken king on a broken world. Humanity was barely a footnote in this story. At the time, humans were considered little more than curiosities in the grand galactic stage, fragile, primitive, and irrelevant. The other races dismissed them entirely, their disdain thinly veiled behind condescending remarks. Humans were an afterthought in the great betrayal, uninvolved and unimportant in the shifting tides of galactic politics. But humanity watched. From their quiet corner of the galaxy, they observed the rise and fall of empires, the alliances and betrayals that shaped the stars. They had seen the downfall of Vorthalik and the merciless sentence passed upon him. Where the others saw a dethroned tyrant unworthy of compassion, some humans saw something different. A glimmer of recognition. A reflection of their own history, of fallen kings and forgotten warriors. And so, the galaxy moved on, leaving Vorthalik to fade into obscurity, but humanity never forgets the forgotten. The first days on Iridios V were a test of everything Vorthalik believed about himself. He stood tall as the alien ships disappeared into the sky, their mocking laughter still ringing in his ears. The toxic wind howled, but he welcomed it, steeling himself against the planet's hostility. He was Vorthalik, the warrior king, forged in the fires of countless battles. A desolate wasteland would not break him. Not yet. The jagged terrain stretched endlessly before him, a sea of crimson rock and dust that shimmered ominously under a pale sun. His first instinct was survival. His armor, once the envy of the galaxy, hummed faintly as he activated its systems. Scanners swept the horizon, searching for shelter, for resources, for anything that might sustain him. But Iridio's V had no interest in offering aid. The toxic air corroded his filters, and the electromagnetic storms that raged unpredictably across the planet rendered much of his technology useless. His pride would not allow him to admit it yet, but the first seeds of doubt were already sown. Each step was a battle against the planet itself. His once pristine boots were soon caked in dust. His hands, accustomed to wielding weapons of destruction, were reduced to clawing at the barren earth for sustenance. He encountered predators, creatures with too many teeth and too little flesh, moving with an unnatural hunger. They tested him repeatedly, and though he fended them off with his strength and what little remained of his weaponry, the encounters left him bloodied. His wounds festered in the toxic environment, the air itself seeming to conspire against his survival. Days bled into weeks, or what felt like weeks. The endless red skies gave him no sense of time. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, a relentless ache that refused to be ignored. He scavenged what he could, roots that burned his throat, water that tasted of rust and decay. His body began to betray him. The once mighty frame that had carried him through 100 wars grew frail. His armor, a symbol of Corvani dominance, became a burden. The joints locked, the mechanisms faltered, and the once brilliant crest emblazoned on his chest dulled, peeling away like the pride it represented. The physical toll was nothing compared to the weight on his mind. Voralik, the unyielding conqueror, began to unravel. He sat beneath a jagged overhang one evening, the remnants of his armor discarded around him. His reflection in a shard of broken metal stared back, sunken eyes, gaunt cheeks, the shadow of the warrior he once was. He tried to summon anger, to channel the fire that had driven him to victory so many times before. Instead, he felt only regret. He thought of the allies who had betrayed him, the faces he had once trusted. He had built his empire on their backs, had believed their loyalty unshakable. How could he not have seen their envy, their fear? In his arrogance, he had ignored the signs, certain that his strength alone would shield him from the inevitable. Now, that arrogance mocked him as loudly as the alien commanders had during his sentencing. One evening, as the dying light painted the sky in shades of red and gold, Voralik took the crest from his armor. He held it in his hands, the last symbol of his power, his legacy. It had once stood for something: pride, victory, domination. Now, it was a hollow reminder of what he had lost. He set it on the ground and left it there, walking away without a backward glance. For the first time, he accepted the possibility of death. Not the death of a warrior in battle, but the slow, cruel death of obscurity. The galaxy had forgotten him. Perhaps it was time for him to forget himself as well. Unbeknownst to him, he was not entirely alone. High above the barren planet, a small human reconnaissance drone hovered, its sensors sweeping the desolate landscape. It had been sent as part of an unassuming exploration mission, more out of curiosity than anything else. The humans aboard the monitoring vessel watched in silence as the drone's feed displayed the broken figure of the once great warrior. To the humans, Voralik was a fascinating anomaly. They had heard the stories, of course, legends of the Corvani Empire and its indomitable king. But what they saw now was not a king, not a legend. He was just a man, stripped of everything, clinging to the remnants of his will to live. The humans debated among themselves, their voices a mix of awe and pity. "He's still alive," one of them murmured, as if it were a miracle. "Barely," another replied. They watched as he dragged himself across the rocky terrain, his movements slow and pained but persistent. There was something undeniably human in the way he fought against the inevitable. He had no reason to keep going, no hope of rescue, and yet he did. One observer, quieter than the rest, finally spoke. "He may have been a king," they said, their voice tinged with both sadness and admiration. "But now, he's just another life fighting to exist." The feed lingered on Voralik as he collapsed into the dust, breathing ragged but steady, and the humans continued to watch. Something in their gaze suggested they weren't merely observing. They were deciding. The debate began as soon as the drone's feed confirmed his condition. The human team aboard the monitoring vessel sat in silence, their gazes fixed on the flickering hologram of Voralik. For all the stories they'd heard of the warrior king, this frail figure crawling across the surface of Iridios V was almost unrecognizable. Yet his will to survive spoke louder than the legend ever could. One voice broke the silence. "We can't just leave him there." "And what exactly do you suggest?" Another replied, skepticism laced in their tone. "Iridios V isn't just dangerous, it's a death trap. Even if we could reach him, we'd be risking our lives for someone who wouldn't hesitate to crush us if the roles were reversed." "But the roles aren't reversed," came the response, firm but quiet. "Right now, he's just a man, alone, abandoned, and dying. If we leave him, we're no better than the ones who put him there." The room fell silent again, heavy with the weight of the decision. Humanity was still new to the galactic stage, a rising power viewed with a mix of curiosity and condescension by the older, more advanced races. Intervening could draw unwanted attention, even provoke retaliation. Yet, their reputation was also their advantage. They weren't seen as a threat, just an anomaly, unpredictable and often dismissed. "It's not just about him," someone else said, breaking the tension. "It's about who we are. They left him there because they saw him as worthless. We see something different. If we don't act, we're no better than they are." The decision was made. Not by a vote, nor by a command, but by the unspoken agreement that passed through the room. Humanity would act, not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do. The rescue plan began immediately. Iridios V was hostile to even the most advanced technology, its electromagnetic storms disrupting communication, navigation, and machinery. But humanity was nothing if not resourceful. The team's engineers worked tirelessly, retrofitting a small craft with reinforced shielding and manual controls to bypass the planet's interference. They developed specialized suits to filter the toxic air and protect against the corrosive environment. Every detail was scrutinized, every risk accounted for, because failure wasn't an option. As the craft descended through the turbulent atmosphere, the team braced themselves for the unknown. The drone's feed had provided glimpses of the planet's dangers, but seeing it firsthand was another matter entirely. Jagged rock formations rose like the broken teeth of some ancient predator, and the air shimmered with a haze of toxins. The landing was rough, but the craft held, its human ingenuity defying the odds once again. They found him not far from where the drone had last recorded his position. Voralik was slumped against a rocky outcrop, his once mighty frame reduced to little more than skin and bone. His armor lay scattered around him, rusted and broken, a stark reminder of his fall from power. At first, he didn't react to their approach. When he finally raised his head, his eyes burned with suspicion and a flicker of defiance. He recognized their insignias, human emblems, unfamiliar but unmistakably alien. His voice, though weak, carried the remnants of his authority. "Come to finish what they started?" The team paused, unsure how to respond. It wasn't fear that held them back, but empathy. They could see the layers of pain and mistrust in his gaze, the echoes of countless betrayals. One of them stepped forward, slowly, holding out a container of water. "We're here to help," they said simply. Vorthalik's laugh was harsh, a bitter sound that seemed to scrape against the air. "Help? From humans? The galaxy's forgotten scavengers? Spare me your charity." They didn't waver. Instead, they set the water down and stepped back, giving him space. He watched them warily, his pride warring with his desperation. Finally, he reached for the container, his hands trembling as he drank. The humans worked quickly, applying first aid to his wounds and stabilizing his condition as best they could. At first, he resisted their touch, growling warnings through gritted teeth. But as the pain subsided and his strength began to return, his hostility gave way to confusion. They weren't mocking him, weren't demanding anything in return. They were simply helping. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice low and raw. "Why would you risk yourselves for me? A king without a kingdom, a warrior without a war?" One of the humans knelt beside him, their expression calm but resolute. "Because no one deserves to die alone," they said, their voice steady and kind. "Not even a king." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Voralik didn't respond, but something in his gaze shifted. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the weight of his isolation began to lift. As they prepared to leave, the humans moved carefully, mindful of the planet's dangers and Vorthalik's fragile state. He was still weak, his body a shadow of its former strength, but there was a spark in him now, a glimmer of the warrior who had once defied the galaxy. The craft lifted off, carrying them away from the desolate wasteland. For Vorthalik, it wasn't just a rescue. It was a revelation. These humans, insignificant in the eyes of the galaxy, had done what no other race would. They had seen him not as a conqueror or a relic, but as a life worth saving. The transition from the toxic desolation of Iridio's V to the sterile, humming corridors of the human ship was surreal. Vorthalik had expected to feel relief, even triumph, at his escape. Instead, he felt adrift, his purpose as fractured as his armor. For the first time, he was not the master of his destiny but a guest in a vessel designed by a race he had scarcely considered worth noting. The humans moved around him with quiet efficiency, their technology advanced yet surprisingly modest. Everything seemed to serve a purpose, driven not by displays of power but by necessity and function. As he regained his strength in the ship's medbay, he found himself marveling at their ingenuity. It lacked the grandeur of Corvani engineering, but there was a beauty in its simplicity, a testament to a race that thrived despite its limitations. Days turned into weeks as his body healed, his wounds tended by human hands. He began to observe his rescuers more closely, drawn to their strange mix of determination and humility. They were unlike any race he had encountered, cooperative, adaptable, and unerringly compassionate. It was their leader, Captain Arlen, who first broke through Vorthalik's silence. "You've been watching us," Arlen said one day, his tone more curious than accusatory. Vorthalik's voice, still rough but gaining strength, carried a hint of his old authority. "You are different. Your technology, your methods, they are not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" He hesitated, searching for the words. "Arrogance. Pride. A desire to prove yourselves superior. It is what I have seen in every race that sought to rise." Arlen chuckled softly. "We've had our share of those moments. But if there's one thing humanity's learned, it's that survival isn't about standing above others. It's about standing together." The words stayed with Vorthalik, echoing in his mind as he continued his recovery. Conversations like these became a daily occurrence, each one peeling back another layer of the human's philosophy. He learned of their history, their struggles against each other, and the forces of nature, and how they had eventually chosen unity over division. It was a concept that both intrigued and unsettled him. One evening, as the ship passed close enough to Earth for its vibrant blues and greens to fill the viewing deck, Vorthalik stood silently, gazing at the planet. Captain Arlen joined him, offering no words, just a presence. Vorthalik finally broke the silence. "It is fragile," he said, gesturing to the world below. "And yet it endures." Arlen nodded. "That's Earth. It's been through wars, disasters, and everything the universe could throw at it. But we always find a way to rebuild." Vorthalik's gaze hardened, though not with anger. There was something new in his expression. "I was taught that strength is dominance, that power is the only path to survival. But you're kind, you have shown me otherwise. You risked everything for me, a stranger, a conqueror. Why?" "Because someone has to," Arlen said simply. "We're not perfect, but we try to be better. Sometimes that means helping someone when no one else will." In that moment, something shifted in Vorthalik. The weight of his past actions, his empire built on fear and conquest, bore down on him. But alongside that weight was something else, a spark of possibility. He realized that strength could mean something more than domination. It could mean building, protecting, and standing for something greater than oneself. Vorthalik made his decision that night. He summoned the crew to the viewing deck, his voice steady and resolute. I owe you a debt, he began, his gaze sweeping over the humans. Not just for my life, but for showing me a path I had never considered. I cannot erase what I have done, but I can choose what I will do now. Your world, your people, have earned my loyalty. The humans exchanged glances, a mix of surprise and pride in their expressions. Arlen stepped forward. What do you have in mind? I know the galaxy's powers, Voralik said, his tone sharper now, the warrior within him rekindled. Their alliances, their weaknesses, their fears. The ones who betrayed me are the same who dismiss your kind as insignificant. Together, we can change that. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity as humanity and Voralik worked side by side. He shared his vast knowledge of the galactic powers, pointing out fractures in their alliances and vulnerabilities in their defenses. The humans, in turn, adapted his strategies to their unique strengths, combining his experience with their ingenuity. Vorthalik's respect for humanity deepened with each passing day. He saw their courage in the face of overwhelming odds, their ability to think creatively, and most importantly, their unwavering belief in the value of every life. It was a stark contrast to the cold, calculated pragmatism he had known among his own kind. The bond between Voralik and his human allies grew stronger. He began to see them not as mere rescuers but as equals, partners in a cause greater than himself. And for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never known as a conqueror: purpose beyond power. As the ship prepared to leave Earth's orbit, Voralik stood once more on the viewing deck, this time not as a broken exile but as a warrior reborn. The humans had given him a chance to rebuild, not an empire, but himself. Together, they would face the galaxy, not as conquerors but as a force for change. And as the stars stretched out before them, Voralik knew one truth above all: his redemption lay not in reclaiming his throne, but in standing with those who had shown him the true meaning of strength. The alliance was unexpected, almost inconceivable. Humanity, small, underestimated, and disregarded, now stood alongside Voralik and the remnants of the Corvani loyal to him. Word of his survival and humanity's defiance spread across the galaxy, whispered first as rumor, and then as undeniable truth. The Corvani warriors, once scattered and directionless, rallied under their king once more, drawn not just by his return but by the transformation in him. He was no longer the iron-fisted ruler they had feared but a leader tempered by humility and wisdom. Together, humans and Corvani forged a bond that caught the galaxy off guard. Humanity's resourcefulness and adaptability meshed seamlessly with the Corvani's military might and discipline. Their combined efforts created something entirely new, a coalition driven not by conquest or fear but by a shared vision of unity and justice. Human engineers and Corvani tacticians worked side by side, blending their strengths into formidable strategies and technologies. Corvani armor reinforced human ships, while human ingenuity redefined the Corvani's traditional battlefield tactics. What emerged wasn't just an alliance but a revolution in how two distinct species could complement each other. The time came to confront the alien powers that had betrayed Voralik. The coalition's fleet appeared on the outskirts of the betrayers' territories, a stark reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite a wildfire. The council of alien leaders who had orchestrated Vorthalik's downfall scrambled to respond, their complacency shattered by the audacity of this unexpected force. The battle that followed was swift and precise, a testament to the alliance's unity. Humanity's tactical brilliance turned the tide of every skirmish, catching their enemies off guard with unorthodox strategies that leveraged both human creativity and Corvani strength. Where the betrayers had expected brute force, they encountered ingenuity. Where they had anticipated chaos, they faced coordination. Voralik led the charge, not as a conqueror but as a symbol of resilience. His presence on the battlefield inspired his allies and unnerved his enemies, a living reminder of the consequences of betrayal. Yet, his actions were measured, his strikes calculated, not to destroy, but to dismantle the power structures that had thrived on exploitation and fear. When the leaders of the Betrayers' Alliance were finally cornered, Voralik stood before them, flanked by human and Corvani representatives. They expected fury, vengeance, and retribution. Instead, they were met with something far more unsettling: mercy. You left me to die, Voralik said, his voice steady and calm. Not out of justice, but fear. You sought to silence me, to erase me, because you saw my strength as a threat. Yet it was not strength you should have feared, it was the weakness of your own unity. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled leaders. I will not take from you what you sought to take from me. I will not stoop to your level. Instead, I offer you a choice: acknowledge the harm you have caused, and work with us to build a galaxy that values life over power. Or continue down your path and face a united front that will not falter. The betrayers hesitated, their pride warring with their self-preservation. But humanity's presence loomed large in their minds. They had underestimated this race once, and the cost of that mistake had been monumental. Now, faced with the undeniable proof of humanity's potential, they chose diplomacy over destruction. The gesture of peace that followed was symbolic but powerful. Voralik offered his royal crest, long thought abandoned, as a token of trust. A human representative, in turn, presented an earth-forged emblem, symbolizing the shared values of their alliance. The exchange was simple yet profound, a moment that would be etched into galactic history. The galaxy took notice. No longer were humans dismissed as insignificant. Their actions had proven them to be more than a rising power. They were a force for good, willing to stand against oppression and extend a hand to even the most broken of beings. Their alliance with the Corvani was a testament to their belief in second chances and the strength found in unity. As the coalition returned to Earth, a ceremony was held to commemorate the alliance. Voralik stood before the gathered crowd, his imposing figure softened by the gratitude in his voice. He spoke not as a king but as a man who had been humbled, broken, and ultimately redeemed. Humanity, he began, his voice resonating with emotion, is the only race that could have seen worth in someone like me, a king stripped of his power, a warrior left to perish. When the galaxy turned its back, you extended your hand. When I had nothing to offer, you gave me everything. You taught me that strength lies not in domination, but in compassion, in unity, and in hope. He paused, his gaze steady as he addressed both humans and Corvani. The galaxy left me to die, but humanity taught me how to live. For that, I will forever be in your debt. The crowd erupted in applause, a mix of human cheers and Corvani salutes. In that moment, it was clear that something had changed, not just for Voralik, but for the galaxy itself. Humanity, once overlooked and underestimated, had proven that their greatest strength was not in their technology or their numbers, but in their capacity to see beyond the surface, to find value in the forgotten, and to forge bonds where others saw only divides. As the ceremony ended and the stars beckoned once more, humanity stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, not as conquerors, but as a force for unity, guided by the lessons they had taught even the mightiest of kings.